Hi, I wonder how many people know the word zodiac is the Greek word for zoo, and that 11 out of the 12 major constellations of the zodiac are symbolized as animals. The only constellation that is not symbolized by an animal is the constellation of Libra, the scales. Have you ever wondered why this is so? I think once you find out the reason you will be surprised, and knowing the true reason may be a little humbling. Your search to find out the reason of how it came about will lead you to a group of aliens that came to this planet called the Annunaki. You'll find out that the Annunaki aliens leader of the group named Enki and his son Marduk journeyed to the moon and spent 2 years there laying out the symbols incorporated in the zodiac. I should say here that this message may not make much sense to many of the listeners that are not familiar with the story about the Annunaki aliens. The story about how they journeyed to this planet in search of gold to repair their planet's atmosphere, gold being the only element that can be pulverized fine enough to stay aloft, to close an ozone hole in their atmosphere. The fate of their planet depended on Earth, the Earth being the only planet in the solar system that had gold. To those that know the story, be alerted, because what I'm about to explain will put new light on what you already know and believe about it. Those of you who would like to find out more about the Anunnakis story, I suggest that you read Zachariah Sitchin's books on the subject, especially the book entitled The Lost Book of Enki, Memoirs and Prophecies of an Extraterrestrial God. The book was translated, compiled, and written from ancient cuneiform clay tablets by Zachariah. I believe if you understand it from the right perspective, you will see that the Judeo-Christian Bible was obviously based on excerpts from it. The story of the Anunnaki aliens, which has been called mythological nonsense by the scientific community, was written as a call to wake up and come alive to sense the truth of its resonance. As the story goes, Enki and his half-sister, and also his son called Thoth, created the species of man by genetic manipulation, using as a base the primitive Neanderthal species they found roaming in the fields. The genetic manipulation was to raise the consciousness of the primitive Neanderthals to a point where they could understand commands on how to do the hard labor, to retrieve the gold from the mines. Men as an unnatural species created by the scientific manipulation of joining their DNA with the primitive Neanderthal species led to the story about Adam and Eve and the curse of Pandora's box. Once it was decided to let the human species live through Noah and his family, it was necessary for the continued upgrading of the DNA of men through a selected group. The Old Testament journey of the chosen group of Hebrews to the Promised Land was really part of the controlled genetic breeding process. The 40-year confinement or trek of the Hebrews through the desert with Moses was used as a type of cauldron container to brew the Hebes by the Anunnaki aliens. Once the Anunnaki put their genes into the species of the animalistic Neanderthals on this planet, they realized for their own good that they were bound by the spirit of life to bring the unnatural genetic manipulation to perfection. The Anunnaki alien gods eventually realized the genetic manipulation was destined to happen because of the cycles of time repeating. The biblical account put the blame of the unnatural genetic manipulation as a sin put onto mankind, to be paid for through pain and suffering. The Anunnaki in some way had to purge and control the animalistic nature out of the Neanderthals' flesh body by rules and laws with penalties if they were broken. This was because their behavior as this new species affected the well-being of them, because the eternal spirit inherent in the Anunnaki genes now being locked in the flesh of the Neanderthals had to live on eternally, and had to be kept alive and conscious in its host through generational reincarnation, which became a learning experience for the humans. The very nature of the universe had become locked in a primitive flesh body, unable to cope with its nature being eternal with no beginning and no end. That nature became the curse known as Pandora's box to mankind. That animalistic nature now being locked in an advanced flesh body without enough time to gain spiritual wisdom has become the fate of the human race. The only way out of the situation for man is through his spiritual growth through time. The biblical statement to confirm this is, now we see through a glass darkly, but when that which is perfect comes, that which is in part will be done away with. This means to bide their time the aliens try to deal with the new breed with reward and punishment, based on laws with the sin in nature, paid for with the blood of animals. But this only dealt with the intellectual nature of man, and was not perfect. It was a given from the aliens, but man had to suffice on his own with an initial crossover to a spiritual nature. This was when Jesus entered the picture. He was a culmination of all the human souls put together, and through his death and resurrection all of mankind was hidden in him, which satisfied all requirements of nature for man to live eternal. The Anunnaki aliens, having their genes locked in the new species, made man become like adopted children to them, that had to be disciplined and taught in the rules of their ways. The Anunnaki aliens' planet Libra would have completely died, if it were not for the unnatural genetic manipulation, to make man as a slave species for the salvation of their planet. The Anunnaki aliens regard the human species as their own children, and are trying to help in the struggle, to fight the less evolved animalistic nature which is as demons in their flesh. The biblical story of the Nephilim giants and the flood was an unfortunate happening that was caused by forbidden uncontrolled mating of some of the Anunnaki males that were enticed by the demonic lust inherent in the flesh of the females of men. This resulted in mutations caused by the combining of the degrading human flesh with the pure eternal nature of the Anunnaki males, resulting in the giants as the men of renown in body, but with an animalistic nature that led to them eating each other as animals. The flood was unavoidable, and allowed to destroy the remaining human species, because of this unfortunate mistake. In spite of the fact that man was allowed to be destroyed, the spirit of life had other plans. Man had to live, because of his connection to the eternal spirit. In spite of a pact made by the Anunnaki leaders to let the flood destroy man, Enki was told in a dream by an old saintly woolly white-haired man, to let Noah and his family live through the flood. He was told to do this by showing Noah how to build an ark using spiritual telepathy. To Enki's amazement, the next morning, when he woke up, he found the plans to give to Noah of how to build the ark beside his bed on the table. Those of you who are familiar with Stan Romanik's alien night dream visitation story, and how he drew plans and formulas in his sleep, and found them on the night table beside his bed the next morning, may think twice about the truth of it after reading this. The truth is that Enki's dream came from his own eternal genes guiding the situation, because Enki fathered Noah through a human female. This was allowed by the spirit of life, because Noah and his family's genetics were not corrupted. Getting back to the original theme of this article, the unnatural genetic manipulation had to be corrected, and this could only be accomplished through time. The design and layout of the Zodiac was to function as a celestial time clock for the timing of the perfection of the human species. It also functioned as a cage, to contain and restrict the guiding of the souls that still have some remaining animalistic nature. The only way out of spiritually controlled closed circles within circles of the Zodiac was through a weighing at the gate of the constellation of Libra, which is symbolized as a scale. Man could not be allowed to leave Earth and enter the heavens until he spiritually perfected. This was as an awakening that was referred to by Jesus as being born again. The Egyptians were as demigods, or as half gods and half man, and were used in the annals of time as a go-between to separate the alien species from the species of man. As it says in the Bible, when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, they were covered with animal skins, but God, the biblical meaning of this is that the human species at first was birthed by surrogate alien mothers, and had a connection to their mother's spiritual nature, but when Adam and Eve first mated on their own, and was tied back into nature as the new species of man, man lost its spiritual tie to the surrogate female's nature, which covered and guided them, and fell to the lower flesh nature of an animal, covering to become intellectual in nature, meaning that the inner voice lecturing and guiding them came from within their own flesh, and not from the eternal spirit flow of life. You may have noticed on some of the walls of the Egyptian tombs the Egyptians were depicted with human bodies and animal heads, displaying their two-part nature or hybrid nature. The point I'm trying to bring out here is that they were displaying the fact that their covering nature was as an animal and their bodies were as gods. The quest of the Egyptians was to bring the stars of heaven onto the surface of the earth by the laying out of their pyramids, temples, and tombs in the patterns of the stars, in an attempt to bring heaven on earth for their reincarnation on earth at the end of the cyclic timing, laid out in the Zodiac. You can see in Figure 1 how the Egyptians portrayed the weighing of the heart as a ceremony. This event was to determine if the heart/soul would be reincarnated on earth, because it still retained some flesh, or if it were lighter than a feather, then it could soar, or rise as a feather floating on the winds to the stars. In the ritual they would prepare the pharaohs to be resurrected to unite with the stars, to return at the proper time back to earth to be reunited with their bodies which had been preserved here on earth for them through mummification. Recently there had been much talk about the Mayan long count cycle that ended on December 21, 2012. It seems everybody missed the truth behind that date, but now I believe the truth is about to be revealed. In the fullness of time, according to the Mayan belief system, their god Quetzalcoatl will return with the collective souls of their people to be reincarnated on earth. He is depicted as a feathered serpent on a flight through the heavens. Notice in the bottom of the drawing of figure 4 you see the depiction of Quetzalcoatl carrying a piggybacked person with feathers in flight with him, symbolizing the collective soul of the Mayan people. Also notice in his hand there is a newborn baby with its umbilical cord hanging down, surrounded with what appears to be a string of genetics or DNA, which he seems to be inserting into the baby as in reincarnation. What he is standing on is very significant. It is the spiraling flow of genetics as in DNA on its journey through time. Also notice that this spiraling genetic flow is connected to a bow that is spiraling, turns one on each end. This bow symbolizes the magnetic field of the earth, indicating that the spiraling rope which symbolizes the DNA is really embedded in the magnetic field of the earth. This bow is very significant in that it indicates the rainbow bridge spoken of in the mythologies. The same bow is mentioned in the book of Revelation, when it speaks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse at Revelation 6:1. I looked, and there before me was a white horse, its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquering. The way I see the meaning of this is that the white horse was the earth during the year 4000 BC, when the earth was in the ice age covered with snow. The bow that the rider held was the magnetic field of the earth during the pole shift. Then eventually the rider who is bent on conquering will be given a crown at the next magnetic reversal when Atlantis rises. This is basically what we have been talking about in this message. The crown given to the first rider of the 4 horsemen will be Atlantis rising. This all seems to be the image of Tiamat during the collision with Nibiru. Is this not showing that cycles within cycles are happening? Just above the bow is symbolizing that crown of the earth where the magnetics surrounding the earth enters into the polar spin axis on down through to the molting central core or heart of the earth. This is the path the souls take to connect back to the sun as the local harbor for souls. Now you are going to see something very remarkable. It shows an example of how all cultures tie together in some way, even if subconsciously. You see in figure 5 a sky chart 3 astrological program laid out of the cosmos, showing a line drawn from the cup of the Little Dipper on the left side of the drawing to the left cup of the Libra scales on the right side of the drawing. In the center of the drawing you can see the Corona Borealis constellation. Notice how I have drawn concentric circles which center on the constellation of Corona Borealis. Normally these concentric circles on a map would be centered on the North Star at the end of the Little Dipper. Also notice beside on the right of the Little Dipper is the constellation Draco, which is symbolizing a bow similar to the bow in the Mayan drawing. The words Corona Borealis means northern crown. In the night sky the northern crown is shown to be made up of 7 very bright stars that shine like jewels in a king's crown. The ancients believed that this was the crown of Christ, and acted as a gate, and somehow you had to go through that crown to get to heaven. Think of the human body and the location of its chakra system. Corona Borealis would be like the crown chakra. The reason I drew concentric circles around the constellation Corona Borealis is because that is where the magnetic pole of 10,500 BC shifted to. To correlate this shift to the surface of the Earth, it would put the location of the old magnetic pole at the Bermuda Triangle. The magnetic pole shift caused the sinking of the city of Atlantis, and the Bermuda Triangle has become the hiding place for the old magnetic pole and the sunken city of Atlantis.